Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where in the world you are, and welcome to this Pipeline Knowledge Cast webinar brought to you by CSG International. The topic of today's webinar is Big Opportunities for Big Data. I'm Tim Young, Pipeline's Editor-in-Chief, and I'm your moderator today. We have just a few quick items to go over before we begin. Today we'll hear from our presenters, and then we'll open up the floor to your questions. To participate in the Q&A portion of the webinar, all you have to do is just type your question into the Ask a Question text area below the presentation window, and then click the Submit button. You may submit questions at any time during the webcast. We'll address as many of those questions as time permits after our presenters' prepared remarks. This webinar also contains some audience poll questions. When the polling questions appear, please select your answer by clicking directly on the radio button and click the Submit Answer button to complete your response. If you have any technical problems during the webinar, please visit our webcast help guide by clicking on the help link below the video window. Now let's go ahead and get started. We have been hearing a lot about big data these days here at Pipeline. It's the term used to refer to the huge amount of data records generated by enormous amounts of high-speed data network usage. And today we'll be discussing the substantial opportunities that surround the significant challenges of big data. We've got a great panel for you today, and I'll go ahead and introduce them. First of all, Monica Ricci. She is CSG International's Director of Product Marketing. She has over 20 years of experience in the communications industry, 16 of which has been working with BSS vendors delivering billing solutions and consulting with service provider customers to evolve their billing-related processes for wireline, wireless, and next-gen services. So welcome, Monica. We also have Jennifer Fellows, the Vice President of Product Management for CSG International, and she manages the product management efforts for Single View and Total Service Mediation product line, focusing on mediation, real-time charging, convergent billing, customer care, and wireless solutions. And finally, we have Dan Smith, Chief Architect for Quero. Dan is a seasoned technical architect with almost 25 years of experience designing, developing, and delivering innovative software and hardware systems. So we welcome all of our speakers, and we'll go ahead and get started. And to do that, I will turn it over to Monica.
Thank you, Tim. I thought it would be helpful to begin by putting some quantifiable metrics around big data. With the growing frequency with which the term big data is used in both the trade and general media, and more importantly, its growing importance in business strategies, a number of industry experts have set out to describe how you might measure big data's size. IDC predicts that the market for big data solutions, which includes networks, servers, storage, systems, and services across all global industries, is growing at almost 40% annually. They forecast big data solutions to reach nearly $17 billion US in spend by the year 2015. Most importantly, this growth rate is 7 times that of the overall IT industry. Others, including Forrester and Frost & Sullivan, use a common framework to describe data as big if it measures excessively in at least one dimension of volume, velocity, or variety. These dimensions are called the 3 V's of big data. Data record volumes must be growing rapidly, or they must be collected and processed with increasing speed, that's the velocity, or they must represent a growing number of transaction types, and that's the variety. In reality, most would acknowledge that big data problems are large in more than one of the dimensions of volume, velocity, or variety. The last citation I wanted to provide is perhaps the most useful when it comes to a big data assessment of any part of your business. McKinsey Global Institute, in their mid-2011 feature on the topic of big data, described big data as anything that is outside of the operating parameters of the typical data set. So really, big data is about managing rapidly growing volumes of increasingly complex transactions at accelerating speeds. To set the record straight, there is no specific metric for volume, variety, or complexity that determines if data is big. If there is any metric that is constantly applied by multiple analysts, it's that big data sets are those that are growing at the rate of 40 to 60% annually. The challenges of big data impact all industries, and I'd like to touch upon a few cases outside of the telecoms industry to begin. In the healthcare industry, big data is associated with the growing digitization of medical records dominated in volume by imagery, such as X-rays or other scans that can be easily transported and shared among networks of providers, practitioners, insurance carriers, and patients alike. The end result is better informed decisions about treatment, resulting in better quality health care for the individual and ultimately healthier results. In utilities, big data is largely associated with the rollout of smart grid infrastructure that enables detailed meter reading data to be collected for a home or business's use of gas, water, or electricity. Smart grid big data provides insight into optimal energy utilization and enhanced monitoring and control, eventually down to the appliance level. The manufacturing industry, as an example, has perhaps always been focused on data, as they've worked for decades to optimize supply chains and speed time to market for the design, assembly, and distribution of products. But even a sector as data-centric as manufacturing can benefit from a renewed focus on both the technologies and the analytics processes that stem from today's big data evolution. Communication service providers across the globe have been grappling with burgeoning network traffic for a while now, and the issues and implications are well understood, if not necessarily well managed to date. But the opportunities from big data reach well beyond efficient management of network traffic. The analyst firm Analysis Mason recently wrote that they believe that mobile operators have the most to gain from big data because of three assets: the quantity of customers that they have, the amount of data available on those customers, and the diversity of that data. At CSG, where our clients are not only mobile operators but broadband operators, ISPs, international carriers, cable and satellite providers, we see the benefits that any service provider can derive from big data approaches to better meet customers' growing demand for content, transportability of that content across devices, and an enhanced experience that packages the collection of content and services tailored to each individual's or his extended family group's needs and tastes. In the service provider environment, there are numerous factors that drive not only data growth and increase in the number of raw records, but the processes that benefit from a better analysis and understanding of that data. Most importantly, and what my colleagues will address later in today's webinar, big data in the service provider organization is about much more than growing network traffic. In addition to increasing record volumes, big data is about better understanding how and when a customer uses his service. This understanding will enable the CSP to better serve the customer and will ensure that the CSP provides increasing value in an ecosystem where more and more content and services are coming from third parties. Customer records, usage records, and billing records are used not only by the CSP anymore, but are often shared with external parties and partners in detail or aggregate fashion. This copying and sharing of data is another factor that both drives the growth of record volumes and benefits from better knowledge from analytics. Data-driven insights can lead to value-based price plans, high-performing advertising models, and enhanced customer experience, and data-driven decisions that improve operations across the board in a CSP environment. Just like the struggle to quantify how big is big, the benefits of successfully deploying a big data strategy in a service provider environment are not always obvious. But the benefits are big too. McKinsey Global Institute, in that same 2011 report, estimates that location-based data alone will generate $100 billion of value to CSPs in the next 10 years. More impressive is their belief that location-based services will generate $700 billion in value to consumers and business users alike, who stand to gain measurable efficiencies in time and cost savings from things like smart routing during their commute, people tracking for both safety and social purposes, and geo-targeted advertising that brings together sellers and buyers with well-understood value that meets a want or a need. What strikes me is that we are all aware that these location data-driven services already exist today, and they can only improve in the future as the data that fuels them is better processed, better analyzed, and better understood. The good news is that CSPs realize this already. A recent survey conducted by European Communications Magazine of industry executives found agreement across the board. 91% believe that big data strategies should be a priority for every service provider. But only slightly more than half of them believed that their organizations were making big data a priority today, so there's still a ways to go. We hope that the rest of this presentation will give you some ideas of ways for you to realize the benefits of big data in your organization. Ultimately, the insights that are derived from big data strategies will increase the CSP's knowledge of both its own operations and of its customer base. This knowledge will enable the CSP to better direct its network investment, to improve the efficiency of its operational processes, to deepen its knowledge of its customers' behaviors and needs, and to improve customer experience and strengthen those customer relationships over time. So with that summary, I will hand the session back over to Tim.
Great. Thanks so much, Monica. If you'll turn your attention to the presentation screen now, you'll see a poll question for our audience. The question is, where do you believe your organization can benefit most from big data applications? Improving customer experience through better understanding of history, preferences, and relationships? Is it through operational efficiencies from improved decision-making and process analytics? Is it through revenue opportunities, such as providing access to your customers' data to third parties? Or will you not benefit? We won't benefit. It's just a big headache to manage records in increasing volumes. So if everyone can take a moment to look at those options, click on your choice and click Submit Answer. We will let everyone take a moment to answer that. And in the meantime, we will continue on with Jennifer.
Mobile data is moving across networks at unprecedented volumes. Well, why? Well, actually, it's for multiple reasons. Firstly, smartphones have entered the market that suit the various users' needs. There are so many choices and lower price points, and users are also pushing their own devices on the network, which is known as BYOD, or bring your own device. And these are at levels we've never seen before. Secondly, many networks have had significant investment ensuring the mobile experience is fast and reliable, promoting even more usage. And thirdly, operators are looking to advance their services and take greater financial advantage of network capabilities, branching out to offer or promote M2M services. As a result, data access has exploded. Recent reports tell us that the global mobile data traffic grew 2.6-fold in 2010 alone, tripling for the third straight year. And we can expect to see a 26-fold increase in mobile data and realize 92% compound annual growth rates. However, the revenues for data are forecast to flatten. That means that controlling the costs of these services is absolutely critical. But how can these services also be monetized? One of the most important catalysts of big data is the investment in LTE. Never before have subscribers experienced the network speed in accessing the Internet or running handset-based applications. These applications, available for business and personal needs, have effectively changed the way we interact and manage all of our lifestyles. As a result, LTE pushed the boundaries of CSPs' operations and business models. Operators around the world are seeing an extreme influx of data charging events, and they are realizing that previous assumptions of usage just doesn't make sense any longer. Behaviors are changing right before their eyes, and there's no precedent to refer to better operationalize and monetize this flood of data charging transactions. In fact, LTE drives changes for more than just the network. With faster networks and more applications, operators are seeing charging records grow exponentially. This influx of events also impacts the entire BSS infrastructure. Big data can have massive effects into many areas of the BSS. Let's take a look at some of the examples here. With LTE, real-time is the way it is. With the instant request from a handset, there are many key data points that tell operators about what that subscriber needs. Understanding these interactions can empower those operators with an immediate trigger to deliver an offer or direct the subscriber to another site or application that results in an on-the-spot purchase. This split-second reaction time requires real-time intelligence. The failure to provide that right response at the right time can be very costly. But this powerful insight cannot come at a great expense. Big data capabilities must be cost-effective. It is presumed that efficient applications must be inexpensive, yet powerful enough to accommodate the applications and integration performance needed to deliver to that real-time expectation. Policy management is yet another aspect of the BSS that relies on a big data strategy. The myriad of preferences included in a network and subscriber profile provide countless details about behavior that impact both performance of the network and the realization of revenue. Each facet within the BSS must be viewed holistically. Every interaction from the initial network event all the way through to the account charge has incredible amounts of valuable information. Gathering, coalescing, and interpreting these connections in a centralized way is the only manner to attain the benefits of a big data strategy. In this diagram, we see how a CSP's upstream customer, like a media company or a retailer, would want to have the ability to react to a real-time interaction. Here, the term, the two-sided business model, represents a CSP's increasing focus on serving not only end customers, but upstream customers who provide incremental or complementary communication-enabled services to that CSP's customer base. The CSP's platforms for not only network services, but customer management and BSS are all invaluable tools to these third parties, as well as the big data intelligence that the CSP can provide into its customer base. That intelligence has real value to these third parties, and exposing access to these networks, its billing systems, and its customer base through various touch points will be increasingly a key source of revenue for CSPs. Well, now we have a real situation on our hands. The broad distribution of smartphones and tablets has driven up the network usage beyond any expert's projection, and that usage is exceeding the capacity of the available network, accelerating the investment to provide more capacity. This is then fueled by inefficient price plans that are no longer viable for this type of growth. This is a perfect storm of high transaction, limited capacity, and capped revenue, and driving CSPs to amend their previous business processes and invest in more innovative and inclusive strategies. Charging and policy applications fully illustrate how important the customer experience has become. Subscribers want choices, and they expect CSPs to provide the applications they need in exchange for their loyalty. The customer experience is the final competitive frontier. Subscribers want their services to be intuitive and easy to use. They want to control the way they use their services and have the freedom to choose what makes sense for their lifestyles. But the services must also be there, and the CSP must deliver on their part of the agreement. So offering solutions like Wi-Fi offload when network capacity is peaking is one way to show the customer that they value their business and will ensure there is no degradation of services. CSPs are realizing that providing subscribers with tools that give them the control achieve mutual benefits. Policy management is one of those best ways to empower those users. CSPs must be keenly focused on that customer and their preferences and demands to retain and grow the revenue from their base. Knowing what drives a subscriber is that foundation for that strong relationship. In this first case study, our customer is one of the top CSPs in the world. They needed to cost-effectively support massive charging volumes as they forecasted that network volumes would grow at a compound annual growth rate of 42% between 2010 and 2014 when they launched their LTE network. Relying upon CSG's intermediate product, They were able to manage all the events, which supported convergence of 3G and 4G mobile data networks, but could also support complex correlation of mobile data PDP context, including record ordering and uplink-downlink aggregation. Also, special rules for data splitting of high-volume sessions and configurable reference data rules for APN name translations and assigning record rating groups according to traffic type, such as music shopping, browsing, MMS, etc. Working alongside the operator, we were able to deliver the 4G data streams into the production in just 1 month. This fast delivery enabled the operator to support the commercial launch of LTE in December 2010, the first commercial LTE launch in the world. The overall project for 3G and 4G convergence only took 3 months in total. In addition to supporting a 60% compound annual growth rate since their launch, parallel projects have already been started to extend the intermediate deployment into other operating countries to both follow and enable the rapid expansion and market-leading rollout of LTE. And in this case study, it represents a fast-growing Malaysian operator in a hyper-competitive market. Their legacy BSS system was running out of capacity, and they needed a more flexible solution to accommodate forecasted customer demand. They also needed to improve their BSS to be more responsive to the dynamic market, as well as improve their overall operation processes. They selected the CSG solution because of its usability and flexibility, as well as extremely high performance at low cost. And this big data solution, in real time, the system immediately updates additions to a dynamic friends and family group, all done instantly to enable the billing system to charge the correct rate. These updates can take place a number of times per minute, all day and every day. With this solution, the CSP radically altered the competitive landscape and improved their competitive advantage in the market by giving a customer a better user experience. Further, this improved productivity in the billing process lowered their operational cost, compressed the network data collection process from what used to take 24 hours to just minutes. And they also reduced the risk of revenue leakage. This is a great example of a successful big data program. So thank you, Tim, and thank you, everyone, for listening. And over to you for the results of the first poll question.
Okay, great. Thanks, Jennifer. So if you'll take a look at your screen, you'll see the results from our first poll question. Where do you believe your organization can benefit most from big data applications? It looks like the improved customer experience is the top choice, followed by operational efficiency. Fortunately, no one believes that they won't benefit at all, so we have that going for us. Monica, is there anything you'd like to say about these poll results?
Yes, Tim, actually, I was going to make the same comment. I'm glad that no one thinks they won't benefit because it certainly is. It can be seen as a big headache to manage the volumes of data up and down the entire operational process. So it's good that everyone at least sees that there's value somewhere in that data. And I think that it's also great to see that that everyone seems to think at this point that the greatest benefit that they can get out of better understanding that data and what it means is improving their customer experience. If that were the only outcome of big data operational processes and analytics, then that is a fantastic outcome that everybody should aim for. And I think that in line with that, what's coming next in this particular presentation from Dan Smith will be of great interest to everyone to see what are some of the things in real-world examples that you can actually do. And I think ultimately, I think that there are revenue opportunities that can be gained as well, and perhaps they're not directly related to big data, but perhaps that's a consequence of improved customer experience. So I think that there's a reason people are interested in this topic, and that service providers are doing things about it today, and hopefully doing more about it going forward into the future.
Great, Monica. I also want to take a moment to remind the audience that if you haven't yet submitted a question for our Q&A portion, if any of these presentations are raising questions for you, then make sure that you use our Q&A portion to submit a question, and we will get to those at the end of the presentations. So thanks very much, Monica, for your response, and thank you, Jennifer, for your presentation. And now we'll turn it over to Dan Smith for a bit about the big data analytics impacts. Dan?
Sure, thanks. I'm going to talk a little bit about analytics, not only what they are and why they're important, but what's required to actually make them work in a practical sense. So the first thing is why. Why are they relevant to a CSP, and why do they provide opportunity to a CSP? And on this slide here, you'll see on the left that there's a list of things that we might categorize as traditional focus, and on the right, some things that would be opportunities for focus with analytics, and specifically analytics on big data. So, for example, rather than focusing on building bigger and faster networks, the focus is and can shift to building smarter networks. Instead of focusing on just getting more and more and more customers, customers can move easily now, especially prepaid customers, so the focus on customer experience and retention and preventing churn becomes an important shift. There's a constant pressure on reducing the margins, so the focus shifts to how do we monetize this data, how do we monetize these data services. And instead of controlling from an operationally, throttling data, how do we enable more personalized offers, and how do we enable the customers to be in more control of options they have around data usage? All of these things, of course, are enabled by analytics, because the more you know your subscribers, the more you know your users and their behaviors, you're in a better position to support all of these initiatives. The other thing that big data and analytics brings is the ability to exploit new business models and new streams of revenue, which is very much related to the convergence of several industries, media, telecom, advertising. And we see several very interesting examples of that, things such as the Comcast purchase of NBC Universal, where you've got the purchase there of a video content provider, the Singtel purchase of Amobi, which is a mobile ad network, and somewhat related but interesting as well was the recent purchase by Google of AdMob. This, consumption advertising network, it's all converging, and that offers opportunities for new revenue streams. For example, advertising. I mean, one of the things that the CSP has is sitting on a gold mine. They're sitting on a gold mine of data. They've got more behavioral data about what a user is doing across all these landscapes than anybody else, and the ability to take that data, exploit it, and monetize it is a huge opportunity. So that's where analytics come in. There's lots of different kinds of analytics, lots of different models that are underneath them, and many common themes across different analytics. For example, customer value is a common theme across all these analytics. The very first thing that you want to do when you're doing analytics at the customer or subscriber or user level is understand what their value is, current value as well as predicted value, what they are in terms of revenue today and cost today, as well as what you forecast them to be over their life cycle. Churn management, this is something that's analytics that have been done for a long time, but the advent of this bigger behavioral data makes them even more accurate because it's a predicted thing. You're predicting through analytics the likelihood of someone to churn. Customer experience, we just found from the poll, is very much an important focus. The analytics in that area are a look at the past to be able to track and measure what the customer experience has been, as well as to predict what levers will increase the customer experience for each individual user. And it will vary between users, and that will be based on behavior, which is, again, where the big data comes in. Another interesting one is planned fitness. Because you've got this behavioral data, you can track a couple of things. You can track and analyze whether behavior actually fits the plan well. And there's a case in there where the behavior is not fitting the plan well, but it's temporarily profitable to the CSP, but that's not necessarily a long-term strategy. You want that customer, if they're a high-valued customer, to stay with you through their life cycle. So you may want to adjust, make offers, have a different dialogue with that customer to get them into the right plan. And again, the behavioral data can help you do that. You can also take that behavioral data and you can look at how well it compares to competitors. That gives you an idea of threat of churn, right, if they're going to defect. Social network analysis is another big one that really comes to bear with big data as well as microsegmentation. We're going to drill into those a little bit in the next slides. So social network analysis, one of the things about the data that a CSP sits on is it's very much oriented toward social network analysis. You know, the Facebook dream, of course, but people calling each other, people texting each other, it's a social network. And there are specific analytics that thrive on this. However, there's some practical inhibitors to those kinds of analytics because these analytics are not things that work on aggregated data all that well. They really need to look at detailed records, detailed interaction records. And when you have such huge volumes of interaction records, it puts you into a whole new analytic. It puts you into the big analytics, as it's sometimes called. And some of the traditional technology, and we'll talk about this a little bit more later, just doesn't support that. So big data and the technology that can support it really opens up the ability to do this kind of social network analysis. And what's the value of it? Well, knowing where there's clusters of networks, who influences who, who's connected to who, can be used for a variety of things. One thing it can be used is to enhance your customer value analytics and your customer value scoring. I might not be that profitable myself, but I'm highly influential to other people who are highly valuable. The other thing it does is it sets up opportunities for referral programs. You might have a cluster of people who are similar in terms of the devices they use or the behaviors they use, in which case you can offer referrals for upgrades in devices, upgrades in plans, and you know that they're going to be, there's a high percentage chance that they're going to be very likely to respond to those. In terms of microsegmentation, this is another thing that's been done in non-big, normal-sized analytics for a while, but it gets greatly enhanced when you've got this large data and this behavioral data. The microsegmentation, the idea here really is that you're doing a lot of complex analytics, but the output are these simpler attributes that label. They're kind of labels or tags, right? So you'll know that someone is a soccer mom or a rush hour commuter or a last-minute top-up, or you can assign these intuitive to business people labels based on the output of the analytics, again, on the behavioral data. And that can be very useful in terms of how you message with your customers, the offers that you provide to your customers, as well as to the BSS applications that might make operational decisions on that. Again, coming back to the concept of value, you might offer or route someone to higher quality of service if you know that their customer lifetime score is a lot higher than someone else. So I mentioned that even though the analytics themselves are quite complicated and they really do bring a whole new breed of person, this data scientist, as you might have heard, the output can be simple. So what we're seeing here, this slide's a little bit busy, but it's intending to portray the fact that even though the analytics are complicated, the output can be simple. That enables scale. So even things like propensity to churn, lifetime value, these microsegmentations that we talked about, those are very easy to consume by a multitude of consumption applications, be it mediation, policy, CRM, how you dialogue with that person, what kind of offers you make. And that's extremely important because it makes analytics real. Now, big data is big, and it changes the technology landscape slightly. A lot of the existing systems for database, data warehouse, they begin to get clogged when you get to a certain scale of analytics. So The architecture that we find to be very enabling and very practical is one that's shown on the screen here. And there's a lot going on here. I won't take you through it all, but essentially it's a two-tiered architecture. It divides streams of data into two categories. The top, on the left there, the box that's got billing data and service provisioning data labels within, you can think of as profile data. They describe that customer, they describe the user, that the subscriber. Those are the things that the traditional data management works well on. Those are the things like master data management, building the best record, the 360-degree view. And those don't go away with big data, but big data clogs those processes. So we advocate and we actually implement and work upon an architecture that splits that stream to where the big data goes through different technology and different processes. We build upon Hadoop for many reasons. And we're not alone. It's interesting. Just yesterday, I noticed a quote from the CEO of Cloudera, which is one of the leading Hadoop distribution providers, as saying that 70% of all smartphones in the U.S. Are powered by Hadoop, and in fact, the Cloudera distribution of Hadoop. I'm not exactly sure how accurate it is, but that's compelling. That says this kind of technology is well suited for big data and big data in the world of CSP. And the only other thing to note here is the streams come together because most of the consumption applications do still operate off of relational structures, and that's fine. The streams can come together relationally and feed those consumption applications, BSS, reporting, CRM. I'd like to talk you through a case study. This is one that's more in the marketing and the messaging use case, if you will. So one of our very large media and entertainment companies, clients, with a focus on sports, had a goal of knowing their customers better, knowing their behavior, and knowing them and their behavior at any point in time and place channel, whether it's on the web, whether it's on their mobile device, other telephone, other types of phones, or even at home, and to serve them better in terms of offering them more relevant content, more relevant interactions, and as well to increase the revenue stream in terms of advertising space. So we built them a very big data solution. You can imagine we capture all web clicks, all ad impressions, all down to the detail where we get multiple records if they click on a video ad, how far they've gone into that video, when they abandoned, whether they watched the whole thing. So it's huge data. It's billions of records. And we ran them through many, many complex models to create microsegmentations, of which these microsegmentations then got fed back into content management to personalize content that was provided to them, as well as to ad servers, which then personalized ads. The benefits were huge. First of all, because of that relevancy, they were able to get more fans to register, to switch from being anonymous to known, which is a big deal. They have a dollar number per registered fans, which is significant. The consumption, as you can imagine, increased, in this case by 150%, subscriptions by 225%, because it's more relevant. It's a win-win situation. And the revenue stream side of it was because they knew the customer so well, the advertising real estate goes way up in value, because instead of just sending you a message that says, or an ad that says, something about Nike, if I know that you're a English Premier League fan, I can offer you something specific to cleats or soccer balls, right? So advertisers will pay more, the CPM, for having their ads presented in that highly targeted context rather than in a more generic context. And that can apply as well to CSPs. Not only do CSPs sit on this mountain of behavioral data that tells them so much about their users, but they also have a unique relationship to where they can talk to those users in a non-threatening way and provide them information as well as advertisement that's very relevant to them. And with that, I'll pass it back to Tim.
Great. Thanks so much, Dan. If you'll once again turn your attention to the presentation screen, you'll see yet another poll question up for you to take a look at. And the question is this: what is the biggest challenge for CSPs when facing the convergence of communications, media, and advertising? Is it gathering and analyzing all the big data, or all the data rather, from across the business? Is it striking and managing relationships with third-party media players and advertisers? Is it establishing policies for using customer data for marketing, customer interaction, and third-party consumption? Or is it convincing the business leaders of the benefits of this convergent evolution? So we will take a moment and let everyone examine that question, submit their answers. Just, again, enter in your choice in the radio button and then click on Submit Answer. And we will revisit those results in just a moment. But for now, we're going to turn back to Monica, who's got a bit of a story for us. Monica?
Thanks, Tim. I thought it would be interesting to end the session today with a little tale that should provide some encouragement about the possibilities offered by big data. This story is about Pat. Pat begins her day with a series of online activity using whatever device she has available at the moment, whether it's a smartphone, a tablet, or a PC. Her breakfast time activity is presumably related to her top-of-mind concerns of the moment. She searches and compares prices for a dishwasher. She tops up her Starbucks stored value card. She reads a safety review for a baby stroller. And she looks up the 10-day weather forecast for Dallas on the Dallas Morning News' website. Based on this information, Pat's online providers, those who were involved in some fashion with this activity, begin to present her with various offers during her subsequent interactions. For example, General Electric and Home Depot offer her deals on dishwashers. Starbucks offers her the deal to bring her back into the store. Vendors like Babies R Us and Chuck E. Cheese give her information catering to the wants of a young one. And the Dallas Morning News offers her a subscription to their iPad application. How valuable do you imagine these transactions are to Pat? First, if data and information about Pat were brought together from a variety of sources, such as her bank, her social networks, and her service provider along with her search providers, the first thing they would realize is that Pat is a man. Pat is a contractor who is working on a major home renovation, so General Electric and Home Depot are still interested in Pat, but they may direct very different offers to him. From location-based information, we know that on the route that Pat takes to his job site every day, there's a Peet's Coffee across the street from the Starbucks. So while Starbucks remains interested in Pat, Peet's may want to see if they can get a piece of the action too. From his social networks, we know that Pat has teenage children, not stroller-age children. So the commerce offers are adjusted from the likes of Babies R Us and Chuck E. Cheese to the more relevant offers for teens from vendors like Best Buy and Applebee's, for example. And finally, we know that Pat lives in Chicago, and it's Pat's sister in Dallas who has just had a baby, and Pat is planning a trip to visit, which is why he was looking at the weather forecast. So offers from travel providers are the most relevant component to complete our story today. To restate what Dan said earlier, your customer is more likely to respond not only to advertising, but to any interaction or piece of push content if it's targeted and relevant. And if targeted and relevant, these interactions are seen to be less annoying and invasive and thus enhance the customer experience. And shouldn't that be one of the top strategic objectives of your big data strategy? So that's the end of my tale, and I will hand it back to you, Tim.
Great. Thanks very much for that, Monica. We're going to take a look at our poll results. And from that last question, what is the biggest challenge for CSPs? It looks like gathering and analyzing the data from across the business. It comes in first, with the second two options tied, and the final option coming in last. Would you like to take a look at those with us, Monica, perhaps?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, again, these answers are in line with what I would have expected, and we're actually seeing some questions that I think we'll address in a minute about, the challenges of gathering and analyzing data from all across the business. So I think it's fairly obvious to us that we have bits and pieces of information up and down the operational process, from the depths of the network out to the boundaries of the layers in which we interact directly with our customers and everything in between. And all of that information is potentially very relevant in this big data universe that we're talking about. And so there's no question that the challenge is first of all, potentially gathering it all, but probably more likely determining, which is the most important and where will you get the biggest bang for your buck, as it were. Where should you begin, especially if you're just starting out on this journey? What's the place where you should begin to focus and get the customer-centric information? I would propose that it's going to be about who the customer is and probably their history with you from both a service and a financial or account perspective, because that's where you're going to be able to drive most knowledge of who they are as a starting point, as a baseline, and then the kinds of things like their regular activity as they're moving forward with their interactions with you, your networks, and your services, to add on to that baseline persona to then better understand not only who they are but where they're going, if you will.
And I think maybe to add to that, from an operational perspective, this is all different types of data sources, and there's different timeliness associated with it. There's different formats. So there's a whole set of operational issues about putting that all together and getting it into formats that actually make it usable for the rest of those downstream activities. So even more upstream, there's quite a bit of challenges associated with that. So I would completely agree with the results here.
Okay, excellent, great. All right, well, at this point we want to turn to the audience and take a look at some of the questions that have been submitted during our presentation. So first of all, we've got a question, and also as a reminder, if you haven't yet submitted a question for our Q&A portion, you can still do that. So just using the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen, you can enter in your question, and we'll try to get to as many of these as we can. We've got quite a few in the queue already. So first I want to turn to Dan. A question for Dan specifically. Could you provide a couple of example use cases for how big data analytics can be applied to mobile users specifically?
Sure. Yeah, there's quite a few of them. I suppose a couple of my favorites, if you will, both fall into the messaging /CRM /dialogue with your customer. There's a couple of areas that I think are underexploited, if you will. One is personalization during roaming. So when people roam, I think in general, and there are exceptions to this no doubt, but in general, they get kind of a generic, hi, welcome, here's your plan kind of thing. It isn't personalized. It isn't with any knowledge of what prior behavior. And there's a huge opportunity there. If you've done the analytics that we talked about earlier, you understand that person's behavior, you understand their microsegmentations, you understand their lifetime value, you can create a much better user experience at the point they roam. You're going to know that they're roaming, and to be able to give them a customized message. For example, if I roam a lot and I'm roaming in the same area a lot, there's a whole different kinds of message that you'd want to provide to that user than if this is something I've never done before. If I'm a very high valued customer, there's a different kind of message that you'd want to give to me. And the messages can come in the form of offers as well, again tying back to value and potential value. Another one I think that is, again, sort of a favorite is the idea of abnormal behavior detection. With all this rich longitudinal behavioral data, you can form patterns of what's normal and what's not. I mean, statistically what's normal and what's not normal. That can be a huge benefit to a couple things. One is timing of the messages. You know at the point when they're beginning to do something that's really out of their pattern. And the data shows that in terms of being able to have a dialogue and an influential dialogue with a customer and a user, when they are doing something that's not normal for them, that's out of their pattern, they're more likely to listen. And the other thing that's interesting is that can be applied not only to postpaid but prepaid too. You might not know, we do this for that large media and entertainment company, you might not know who they are. In other words, you might not know this is Bob or user Pat, but you do know their behavioral patterns because you can track it to a device, you can track it to a SIM card. There are ways to link that kind of behavior and therefore do the analytics that predict what's normal and what's not. And you can create highly personalized messages even to prepaid customers in cases like that, and in fact use those kinds of analytics for optimal timing as well.
Great, Dan. That's good. Excellent. We've got a lot of really practically minded questioners out there, which is a good thing. And one of the questions that I now want to point over to Jennifer, and maybe Dan can speak to this a little too. In terms of the case studies that you have and other use cases that have been out there, what sort of real return on investment, real benefits have the customer companies seen?
Yeah, I can take that first. In the case studies that we've walked through in the initial section about the network providers, the CSPs, we found incredible amounts of return on that investment. Specifically, just being able to move from the old hardware, number one, move from older hardware to more commoditized hardware, that immediately affects the bottom line, and the return on investment of that is typically in less than a year. And that's been the case not only for these two examples that I went through, but for several other examples. But another one that's probably more important in some respects is just the operational benefits and the response to the customers. We've seen customers gain, over 40%, 50%, within the first year, just on operational performance alone, by moving to a more contemporary solution, a more flexible solution, allows them to support multiple network technologies all in the same application. In the example I gave where this operator was moving from 3G to 4G, you still needed to support the multiple different network inputs and file structures, and being able to do that with a newer application just saved tons and tons of time and just overall operational expertise gained from that was immeasurable. But they were seeing greatly over 50% worth of benefit within the first year, just in the operational processes. And from the customer side as well, I think in our second example, it was really clear being able, especially in a super competitive Asian market, being able to retain those customers because of the flexibility and the improved performance. Again, very strong recovery and return on investment on that side. So, that has been typically the message we get back from our customers who use these applications, and it becomes a very core part of their big data strategy.
Great. Did you have anything to add to that, Dan?
No, that was pretty good. The only thing I would, I was actually just taking notes, but the only thing I would add is the other case study that I presented. Even though it was not in the CSP space, the financial benefits were huge, which is great for us because it makes us very sticky. But that same thing can be applied in the CSP space. So there's opportunities there for huge ROI in new data streams as well, or new revenue streams.
Great. Excellent. Okay, at this point, I'd like to turn over to Monica and ask you a question. What do customers really think about the idea of you having so much information about them that you might share with third parties? Aren't there privacy issues related to this?
Yeah, there's no question that as you look at what you do with data about your customers, both internally as well as what you share externally to third parties, that you have to address privacy concerns, not only just from on the basis of trust on behalf of your customers, but increasingly because of growing regulation in the U.S. and around the world about that. I mean, there's already pretty strict regulation in place, which restricts what you can can share. But I think ultimately, I think that the relationship between the customer themselves and all the numerous providers that a customer uses that has some or all of its information, I mean, that relationship will have to evolve. And I've been hearing a lot recently about the customers actually want to say. So, if I know that either my service provider, my mobile service provider, for example, has access to all this information, I might want to be able to have a relationship with that operator. And similarly, Google, they're sort of the epitome of this. I might want to be able to tell them, I'm okay if you share this, this, and that, because I see the value of other people knowing that, because they can actually enhance my experience. And not just from a commerce or an advertising perspective, but in general guiding me with content and interactions. As a consumer starts to see value of certain information being made available to multiple parties, then the consumer should have a role in saying that, and basically saying, I want people to know this, but I don't want them to know that. And so of course, then there are going to be people at both extremes. There are going to be people that say, and there are today, no one knows anything about me. We know that there are still, a very large set of anonymous users, both online as well as, there's a number of people in prepaid users across the board that people don't really know who they are and can't form a baseline persona for them. So there's one extreme people who say, nope, nothing, you can't use anything about me, and I don't care. I'm happy with what I have. And on the other extreme, there are people who say, yeah, I really see the benefit of having this set of vendors that I've selected and I've been a part of selecting that can know this about me, because I get a great experience out of it.
Yeah, I agree. And I would add also, I think that the key to this falls into a few categories. One is transparency, letting people know that you're using the data and how. And Zappos is a shoe company that's great at that. They're very good at using data, and they right there on their site tell you exactly what they're doing with it, which builds a trust relationship. The second thing is a value exchange. That's key. I think we all as consumers are more willing to have companies store and use our data if we see the value in it. So if you have a clear value exchange, you've got the transparency. I think those are two key things. The third thing I'd add would be preference management, highly detailed preference management. So you put me in control as a consumer of saying not only how I want you to communicate with me, but potentially even how you are allowed to use my data, right? So that's the control part. The transparency builds the trust part, and the value exchange builds the ROI. Why would I do it? Why would I let you use my data?
Okay, great. We have time for one more question briefly, so I'll ask this, and I'm actually going to I'll push this towards Dan once more. With all the various sources of data, where do you see is the best place to begin to mine information, and what do you see as the most valuable source of information if you had to pick a top choice?
Well, that's a good question, and I was thrilled to see the poll results show essentially what I would translate or interpret as data management being one of the big concerns, because it's true. It's the least sexy, if you will, thing, but it's the underpinning of everything. And so the data management is a great thing to focus on. So what sources of data? Certainly some of the traditional ones that you'd find in a master data management scheme, which I spent a lot of my career in. The billing, the account data, service provisioning. What kind of services do you have? How are they activated? What your billing history, so you've got a sense of revenue from that client, from that user. But really, but the significant thing is the behavioral data, which comes in the form of CDRs, EDRs, IPDRs, that's really tracking your interaction through the network. Mediation components, functionality is a great source of that data, that kind of data. With CSG, we have intermediate, and that is one of the key sources of our big data solutions. You get a lot of that kind of behavioral data in terms of calls, data downloads, et cetera, through that. Again, that's the key to the kingdom that I mentioned before as the gold mine that CSPs sit on. The other data is required. It's supplemental data. It informs the analytics as well, but I think the competitive advantage is in that behavioral data.
Okay, fantastic, Dan. Well, with that, we have reached the end of our hour. If there were a few questions that we didn't get to, and if we did not get to your question, we will follow up with you later by email. Thank you all for attending today's KnowledgeCast webinar, and we want to take another moment to thank our presenters, Monica Ricci and Jennifer Fellows from CSG International, and Dan Smith from Quero, a CSG International company. An on-demand recording of this webinar will be available shortly, and you can find that along with information about our whole series of KnowledgeCast webinars at www.pipelinePub.com/webinars. On behalf of our guests and our sponsors, we want to thank you for your time and have a great day.